Thank you, Pierre. Finally, we have Normand Mousseau, who is a full professor and university research chair in complex materials, energy, and natural resources at the Université de Montréal. He's a world-renowned researcher in complex materials and biophysics with more than 150 scientific articles. He's been following and publishing on energy and natural resource issues since 2005. In 2013, he co-chaired Quebec's Commission on Energy Issues. The report was published in February of last year. In addition to his public policy work and his research, Professor Mousseau is a public personality as well and has produced and hosted the popular weekly radio show La Grande Équation at Radio Ville-Marie for the last 4 years. Normand.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. I should correct something. It's not a popular radio show. It's a popular science radio show. It's not so popular, but okay. So what I want to do is to go over the report that that was published a year ago. That work that was done essentially by Roger Lanoux. Roger Lanoux is a former vice president for strategic affairs and planning at Hydro-Quebec. He's the economist, and I'm the physicist, so that you know how to position. So, essentially, I guess I'll just let me tell you how it works. So the work was launched in 2013 by the Parti Québécois government. So there was a preparation of the consultation document that I headed. And then in July 2013, the commission was named. And since it was a minority government, we were told we should have the report yesterday. So that's almost what we did. So we went into public hearing over 6 weeks around Quebec. That was a lot of fun with the driver and all this. I like that a lot. And meeting a lot of people. We had 48 sessions in 18 cities. And then in October, we met with experts, a number of roundtables to understand more specific issues. We met in November with natives, and we finalized the report that was sent to the minister at the end of January. And the report itself was made public about 2 weeks before the launch of the elections at the end of February. And so the report was rapidly shelved, I must say. And now at the moment, the current government is launching a new reflection on energy that will lead to an energy policy at the end of 2015. And the place of the report in this, let's say, is not so clear. Nevertheless, I will go over what we concluded. We had a lot of, the commission was launched in the middle of the summer with a very short time, and yet we received about 470 memoirs. So a considerable amount of work, and there was a considerable interest on the part of the population and a number of groups to really do all this work during the summer, between the vacations and all this, holidays, to really get this by the beginning of September when we started. So really there was a lot of people who worked on that. So let me first show you what are the main observations that we made, okay? First, what's the role of an energy policy typically? It's to ensure security of supply, okay? The problem is that there's no problem with security of supply in Quebec, so that was or more or less, we didn't need to be there. Essentially, there's oil available plentiful, okay? Alberta doesn't know what to do with its oil at the moment, and really the rest of the world neither when you see the prices. So there's a lot of oil available, and we have to pay it at the world price, but that's it. There's also a lot of natural gas. Natural gas is more kind of a continental market, and yet it is easily available at extremely low cost. Even these days, it's unbelievable cost. I think it's $2.5 a gigajoule these days. And Quebec has access to a large amount of low-cost electricity. Okay, so in the end, we could just finish the report there and go home, but no, I'm an academic, so I cannot stop at this. So we decided to go beyond this. So just to show you the surpluses, okay? essentially, what you see here are the exports that we are making at the moment, and with what is coming online, what will be available. So with what is already predicted, so it's up to kind of at 40 terawatt hours. So we have at least surpluses of 40 terawatt hours available. Okay, that's about 15% of the production, more than that, sorry, more than 20% over what we're consuming in Quebec. Okay, so we will have a lot of electricity available. Okay? So there's absolutely no problem, and it's kind of the way surpluses are presented in Quebec because of the structure. They always underestimate when they present it to the public by a factor of 10 or 20. So we have huge amount of available electricity, and I will come back to this. That's a problem. Another observation is that everywhere where people are thinking about energy policy today, they are including this thinking into the larger framework of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And for us, that's really what the challenge is in Quebec, because the government of Quebec, both Parti Québécois and Parti Libéral, have committed to reducing greenhouse gases. So I would say there's a consensus in Quebec that this is an issue that has to be fought. Energy represents almost 3/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions. So you cannot avoid thinking about energy when you talk about greenhouse gas emission. And oil, even today, at the prices, is more costly than electricity. Since we import all our oil, then clearly there's something to be done with putting all this together. Okay. And when we think in terms of sectors, what type of energy is consumed, that also helps us to show what the challenges are. So what I'm showing here is the energy performance sector. So you have the 4 standard sectors, so residential, commercial and institutional, transportation and industrial. So in gray is oil. So you say that, of course, you see that in transportation, essentially 100% of the energy used in transportation comes from oil, roughly 100%. When you go to residential, you see that more than 85% is already renewable in Quebec. So only about 15%. Heating oil, still some, although less and less with the cost, and natural gas, but it's not so popular in Quebec. If you go to industrial, it's 75% is renewable in terms of energy use. So the industry in Quebec is very green, in part because, of course, it has been attracted because of low electricity costs, so they're using electricity. Also, paper industry is using a lot of forest waste for heating, so that's why. And finally, commercial and institutional, which uses more hydrocarbon gas, mostly for heating. So they have a larger use of non-renewable energy. So if we want to have a policy, we have to also think of where it is, where each type of energy is being used. Okay. Other observation we made is that the actual measures are likely to be insufficient to reach the goal greenhouse gas reduction objectives for 2020. What has been done, we've mentioned it before, there's a carbon market that has been created. It was supposed to include also Ontario, British Columbia, and then about 12 states and provinces. Finally, there was only 2 who signed to it, Quebec and California. And that poses problem for Quebec because the cost of reducing greenhouse gases will likely be lower in California than in Quebec. So what we might end up is to buy and to pay for the structural changes in California instead of structural changes in Quebec. So this capital flight with no direct effect. Why? Because California is far. So it's unlikely that there will be money going from California to Quebec for services to reduce greenhouse gases. So it's important that this market be integrated also geographically. So that's a problem. We have to, contrary to everywhere else, where the first fight for reducing greenhouse gases is to change the electricity production. In Quebec, we are essentially at 100% renewable energy in electricity. So we have to target heating and mostly transportation, and that's costly and that's long term. And that's something that places us in a different set. Another observation is that essentially the ministry doesn't have the capacity for analysis nor competence to develop and to see what's happening in the energy sector. Essentially, Quebec has been reducing civil servants for 20 years now, hiring one every 2 retirement, not hiring people with masters or PhD because you have to pay them. And that's the sad part. And there's no data. I mean, Pierre Olivier said that it's hard for him to get data, but sadly the ministry doesn't really have any more data than Pierre Olivier, and possibly less. I mean, I'm a physicist, so I was named and I came in all happy because I said I'll be able to do simulation, test models and all this. I came at the government and I realized that they had one model that was developed by a physicist colleague 40 years ago, and 35 years ago in the beginning of the 80s, that is still model used, and it has increments of 5 years. So you put new data every 5 years, 81, 86. When we were named in 2013, there was still the data from 2011 were not available. So the data in the model were from 2006. I mean, it is absolutely impossible to know what you're doing, okay? So this is a major problem. So that's the kind of observations. So let's go to the recommendation from these observations. First, we need to adopt a long-term perspective. We cannot think and plan over 5 years or 10 years. We need to have a long-term goal, and then, of course, develop intermediate milestones to reach this goal. Okay. What we are proposing, and this is out of a hat, because we didn't have any simulation, a modeling capacity. Okay, we had a team. We were 5 people, including one writer for this this commission. Okay, so we didn't have the capacity to do long simulations, but essentially we can, on the back of the envelope, that's what physicists do, and guess that we would be able to reduce by 75% by the energy sector greenhouse gas emission by 2050. Relatively rapidly, 20% reduction in use of oil product by 2025, essentially by removing oil from heating. Okay, we should increase, of course, carbon royalty on hydrocarbon, not just count on the market, but carbon royalty is taxed, but we were not allowed to use tax in the report, so we use royalty, but no, that's the same word. Okay. So that's one thing we agreed to do for the minister. The rest of was essentially what we thought. And suspend the carbon market until Ontario and nearby market also join it. We thought that we had to use what we called maîtrise de l'énergie, so energy management, to go beyond energy efficiency. Because energy management means using the right energy at the right place, not only the most efficient. For example, we recommend abandoning heating oil, and of course not moving to electricity, but move, for example, to biomass or natural gas. Biomass is less efficient than heating oil because it has more water in it. So formally it's not it's not more efficient, but it makes more sense. So we should move to this. Okay. We should also make sure that all the planning that we do beyond the simply energy production has to include this idea of energy management, maîtrise de l'énergie, in the urban and territory planning. And that's why you need long-term thinking. You cannot just plan for 5 years or 10 years if you want to introduce these concepts in all the development that you do. Because urban planning, transportation, are things that you have to think over 50 years or 60 years or more. So you have to include this. Okay. You have also to introduce energy efficiency, though, for industrial and commercial usage, because energy efficiency has been shown over and over again that it's highly linked with competitiveness. If you use the energy efficiently, typically it means that you have a very efficient process, you make better products, you make cheaper products. So this has to remain there. Okay. We have to stop constructing new electricity supply infrastructure, and that's what really killed the report. Okay. Essentially, as I told you, we were exporting last year 35 terawatt hours. That's more than 15% of the production. Okay. most of it was exported below the cost of the new acquisitions that we are making in Quebec. Essentially, you can say that for the first 10 terawatt hours, we can sell at peak hours. At peak hours, you can make money out of it. If you remove these 10 terawatt hours, we were left with about 25 terawatt hours last year. They are sold off-peak. And when you take the amount you get that you sell to less than 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay? The new acquisitions since 2008 are between 6 and 10 cents or 11 cents a kilowatt hour. So essentially what we do is that we buy either to hydro, small hydro, or windmills, wind producers. We buy at 10 cents. Then we take this electricity and sell it to the neighbors, be it Ontario or the northeast of the U.S. mostly, at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, so we are heavily subsidizing the neighbors. That's very good for the neighbors. But we were told we are a poor country, poor province, and so that doesn't help. And so what we said that we have to stop this. It makes no sense. Because until we find a way to sell this electricity at a decent price, there's no reason to keep building. And as Pierre-Olivier said, in fact, we could also stop building and then start digging in the use that we are making to use less electricity, and then we could sell it before we move to building new. But that's one thing, okay? Essentially, there is no way today that we could find, with the current infrastructures, to benefit from the green energy that we're producing, okay? Almost nobody else in the world has this problem of having too much renewable energy, but it's even worse. We lose money for every kilowatt hour now that we are ordering and putting in line, okay, which is unbelievable. But there's a lot of people who like building, who like having this electricity bought from them at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So the government has a lot of difficulties facing these facts. We also looked at the possibility of exploiting oil. So in Quebec, there's been discussion of oil windfalls, enormous oil windfalls in Quebec. I mean, most of it is unproven resource. Okay, so we don't know if it's available. We don't know what it would cost to exploit. But still, people are dreaming a lot about it. So the first thing we said is that we first make sure we have in the ministry the capacity to supervise the right regulations, and then we should discuss a model. What's the economic model? I mean, the current model, for example, will not allow Quebec to benefit from exploitation, say, of shale gas or shale oil, and then decouple totally oil production from energy policy. Because oil, contrary to electricity, oil is a world market. Okay, so you put it in a ship and you sell it at the same price as you will buy it anywhere in the world. And therefore, it's the same thing as gold or iron ore or whatever. You should completely decouple and treat it the same way, be it in terms of greenhouse gas emissions or other effects than other production, and not think about saying it's our oil. And it's amazing. Everybody who came at the commission, for example, were always thinking or saying, this is the oil we will producing for ourselves. The minister says that. And no, it makes absolutely no sense. Electricity is different because electricity is highly constrained by the capacity of exportation. And so this is really a local market. So you have to think kind of locally. This is not the case for oil. So you cannot think the same way. We have to adopt a long-term planification. So we had a whole chapter on governance. Governance doesn't interest any reporters. So essentially, we got absolutely no mention in the press of this governance. But if you don't manage properly, you cannot get the results you want. Okay, this is more complicated. That's why government likes to first think about electricity production. For example, if you think about greenhouse gas, or when you discuss energy, typically you discuss everything and then you turn and say, okay, I'll talk about electricity, because electricity is the easiest to manage. You just make a phone call to the electricity authority or to the electricity producer and say, shut down this, open this, move that, and it's done, okay? There's no governance problem. If you want to change transportation, if you want to change planning, if you want to change oil and consumption, gas consumption, it's much more complicated. You need real thinking, you need real feedback, and this is something that requires an efficient structure, an efficient way of moving forward. So we had a number of recommendations, and one of it was to say we need to create an energy research center, a bit like we have in Quebec on climate change. It's not mitigation, it's climate change. Uranos, adaptation, yeah. Okay, so we have a group which was Uranos, which is a research center that combines government, industry, and university people, who has been extremely successful over the last few years. And since this is rather cheap and a very nimble structure, we think that we should go with something like this in the energy sector in order to really have the capacity to model and to know where we're going. This implies difficult changes, okay? If we want to stop building new electricity production, it means clearly maybe stopping investments of a tune of $2 billion a year. So that's a lot of money. If we eliminate heating oil, we affect a lot of the distribution industry. If we enforce sustainable development and wait to have the right environmental ruling, maybe we will slow down oil exploitation, although I'm not sure about that one, especially these days. If we impose new rules for urban and territory planning, it forces people to think how to do things differently, and that's always difficult. It's the same thing in the construction industry. For example, in the construction industry, what we say is that we should absolutely include total cost of usage for mortgage and for planning costs, and that would help a lot to force people to move to more efficient buildings, because total costs include also energy costs. But there are a number of positive fallouts. Essentially, by removing heating oil, and especially if we move to waste, forest waste, that would help a lot in the regions, develop new industries that would be not so sensitive to the global economy, and that might generate up to $1 billion a year in a new economy. We propose to move to 2% of all energy costs to use them for energy management. At the moment, this is done only for electricity and natural gas. We propose to go also and get 2% from oil expenses, and that would bring in about $600 million. That would have a fallout much larger if used properly. With transformation of financing rule in building, it would be possible to, because if you include the total cost, you can finance at higher level, and that would allow you to spend at the building stage up to $2 billion a year. Again, all these numbers are back of the envelope, so I don't have fancy models like Pierre-Olivier. And investments in public transportation, because that's where we should go. Quebec doesn't produce any car, okay? So giving like we do now, $8,000 to buy a new electric car, where sends the money completely outside of the province. It's useless. We should use this money to push on public transportation, because there's much more returns local on public transportation, and it's much more efficient to transform the urban infrastructure to move in the right direction. I would like to mention a few good ideas that are bad for Quebec. And I must say, I'm not always in sync with Pierre-Olivier, and one of it is on the price of electricity, but I'll come back to this. We have put smart meters in the houses recently. Around Quebec, we're putting them now. And of course, this kind of spells the coming of hourly rates, varying rates. But it makes no sense in Quebec to have different rate at dinner instead of at night or in the morning. Because essentially the whole infrastructure, electricity distribution infrastructure in Quebec, is built to handle the demand when it's minus 30 outside for heating, okay? And all the demands. Everywhere else, what you want to do is that you want people not to pull too much on the network at 6 p.m. because that would force you to have larger transformers, have the capacity production to deliver at that moment. In Quebec, we can deliver an answer when it's minus 30. So in the middle of the summer, everybody can wash their clothes, the dishes, dry their clothes everything at the same time, it doesn't make a bimp on the demand of electricity. Okay, I mean, we can answer all this, so there's absolutely no reason to do this. Okay, another, that we should support financially alternative renewable energy for Quebec. As I told you, that's stupid. At the moment, we don't know what to do with our renewable energy. Okay, that's the situation. Quebecers do not pay enough for electricity, and here I'm in strong disagreement with Pierre-Olivier. We can sell our electricity at the moment at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, that's the price we're getting with the current infrastructure. Okay, so there's absolutely no reason to say that we don't pay enough. For heating, the competition is natural gas, which today is cheaper than electricity. So when people are using electricity to heat, they are paying more than the competition. So clearly, we are not paying too cheap our electricity currently. If we can develop new markets, if we find ways to benefit past this 35 terawatt hour, then it can make sense. And that's what we say in our report. We should look at the price of peak price that we can get, okay? And that should set the level for what price we should pay in Quebec, or how we should think, not the price we should pay, but how we should think of price in Quebec. If we can sell more electricity outside at better price, then it's good. But at the moment, what we find is that it's at 3 cents at best, what we can get for the electricity we would not consume in Quebec today. So we're not paying too much. That it's a stupid idea to heat with electricity. Here also, I'm totally in disagreement. First, electricity is 100% efficient for heating. Okay, you can even get more than 100% efficient if you use heat pump, for example. You can get 400% efficient to about 100% depending on the temperature. Okay, so it's very efficient to heat with electricity, much more than natural gas. Natural gas, you get when you buy a brand new heater, you maybe at 90%, and after 5 years, you're around 85, 83% efficiency. Okay, so you don't get the same efficiency. So that's important to realize. The fact that we should be more efficient in using electricity, I entirely agree, okay? But at the moment, there's no point. We don't know what to do with our surpluses. So that's not the priority. That we move, for example, to heating to biomass, that's also not a bad idea, because that's another way of supporting local. But biomass is more expensive than electricity. So in the current market, it makes no sense. In the future, we have to move. Clearly, we have to move to net zero buildings, okay? That's the direction if we want to have enough energy, is to use less, okay? But that's not the priority. In Quebec, the priority today is to decrease the use of oil and hydrocarbons. And once we know how to make money out of our electricity, if we build new lines to Ontario and we can sell it at good price, that's a very good idea. But the reality today is that we cannot, okay? We are already exporting, filling the lines almost as much as we can in Quebec. And yet we cannot make money out of it. So with this, I will stop. This is a few of the books on energy I wrote, so I'm making some publicity, but that's it. So thank you very much for your attention.